No one suspects the woman who smiles too much at dinners, who knows exactly when to laugh, who compliments even the most difficult mothers-in-law with surgical precision. And no one doubts the sincerity of someone who cries discreetly at the altar. But that night, beneath the artificial flower petals falling from the crystal ceiling of the Zheng mansion, only one person knew that the wedding wasn't a dream, but a trap. Her skin seemed to glow under the ivory dress, but it wasn't light, it was calculation. His gaze appeared intoxicated by love, but it wasn't passion, it was vigilance. While the guests toasted the new couple, the groom clenched his fists under the table, as if holding a secret that could explode at any moment. She didn't know, but he already knew. He knew everything. In South Korea, where traditional families still control century-old businesses and a surname can be worth more than character, marriages are never just about love. And at that flawless ceremony, between expensive arrangements and rehearsed smiles, two stories crossed with opposite intentions, one of a woman who wanted to rise, and one of a man who chose to wait. But he wasn't just anyone. Zheng Minho, heir to the country's fourth largest construction company, grew up hearing that the world was made of contracts, and that feelings once signed with a golden pen become liabilities. His father died distrusting a love that destroyed him. Minho promised never to fall, promised to be colder, promised never to let the heart choose for him. But he didn't keep that promise. She appeared at the end of winter. She had a simple resume, a refined education, and a charm that seemed too natural to be real. Lee So-ra spoke little about herself, but shared touching stories about her sick mother, her difficult childhood, and her faith in human kindness. Within months, she was sitting at the Zheng family table, enchanting everyone with sweet words and delicate gestures. No one suspected a thing, except him. And that's why he chose not to stop her. He chose to let her in. Before we continue, if you've ever felt that love can be used as a weapon, or that some people simply wait for the perfect moment to show who they really are, then subscribe to this channel and like this video. This is your free The Rama channel here on YouTube. She didn't know her fate had been sealed the very moment he decided not to love her, but also not to push her away. While she executed what she thought was a perfect plan, he assembled a silent chessboard, where each of her moves only fueled his next play. Sora wasn't foolish, but she underestimated the patience of a wounded man. The wedding took place with grandeur. The magazines reported it as an unlikely union between a traditional heir and a former literature student from a public university. But no one noticed the most important detail. The prenuptial agreement wasn't just about assets. It was about silence, and also about time. On the first night, she expected flowers. She received distance. In the following months, she offered calculated affections, soft words, textbook courtesies. But nothing broke the ice in his eyes. Minho was kind, but unreachable, and that began to frighten her. Because a woman like Sora only has control when she's loved. When she isn't, she starts to fear being truly seen. She tried. Sometimes overdid it. Other times stayed too quiet. But she never realized that, in every moment, he was taking notes. Not on paper, but in memory. The same memory trained by his father to manage billion-won contracts was now used to map the woman with whom he shared a roof. And more than anything, to discover how far she would go. Minho had friends, investigators, discreet sources, and an ancestral motive. His mother. The woman who spent the last 10 years of her life in a psychiatric hospital, repeating the name of a former daughter-in-law who stole everything and disappeared. That family trauma made him distrust everyone, but it also taught him not to react quickly. He learned through pain that the best strike is the one no one sees coming. So-ra didn't understand his silence. She thought it was fear. Or maybe the chronic shyness of the rich. When she discovered the size of the inheritance, she was certain. All it took was time. Just win over the uncles, show herself as useful to the business, get pregnant. She had goals, and believed love wasn't necessary when you had strategy, but love wasn't what he wanted. He wanted justice. The staff whispered when she passed, not out of respect, but suspicion. They sensed the scent of perfume too expensive for someone who, until recently, used public transportation. She changed quickly, new clothes, unlimited cards, trips, but the more she gained, the more he distanced himself. Until one day, she woke up and found a note on the desk. "Do you really believe you're winning?" She laughed, thought it was charm, a rich man's mystery. She didn't know that very night, he had visited one of the former families she had deceived, and retrieved a copy of an old contract, where the first time she used a false name was recorded. So Dasharu wasn't who she claimed to be. And Minho wasn't the man she thought she had conquered. In company meetings, he no longer brought her. But at home, he maintained the smile. Their friends found it strange. She tried to convince them he was tired. But inside, she began to feel a growing pressure. It was as if the palace was slowly sinking. And she didn't know where the lifeboats were. The cook, an old woman loyal to the Zheng family, once dropped, accidentally, the wedding ring of Minho's mother onto the living room floor. Sora saw it, picked it up, and for a moment, saw her reflection in the ancient gold. She didn't see pride, nor glory. She saw fear. She saw what she always avoided seeing, that maybe she had climbed too high without knowing how to descend. The fear grew the moment a letter arrived. No sender, just a photo. In it, a man with a blurred face held the certificate of a bank fraud case. With her name listed as secondary beneficiary. She didn't know the man, but she recognized the handwriting of the handwritten caption. Lies age badly. She tried to manage it, tried to deny it, but he already knew. And he wouldn't stop. Slowly, she began to lose ground. One card was blocked. Then the housekeeper was fired. The driver disappeared. She asked, and he replied, "I'm reorganizing the house." But what he was really doing ran deeper. He was removing, one by one, the steps she had used to climb. And all of this without raising his. On the morning when everything truly began to collapse, the sky was too clear. No clouds, no wind. And because of that, there was unease. Lee So-ra always said that days too perfect were a trap. But that day, even feeling a chill when she woke up, she ignored the premonition. She had an important brunch with the wives of Zheng Company shareholders and needed to appear firm. Like a woman who earned everything on her own merit, her makeup was applied with more precision than usual. The dress she chose was discreet, but elegant. And the necklace? The same one she knew Minho hated. Because, according to him, it was too flashy for someone who hasn't yet learned to respect the silence of the rich. Even so, she wore it, a small silent provocation. But that day, she didn't know that when she descended the stairs, she was no longer descending as a wife, but as a defendant. In the living room, the temporary housekeeper, a young woman who barely looked Sora in the eyes, handed her a letter. No sender, no luxurious envelope. Just a sheet of paper folded in three, with a single sentence. "Are you ready to dance with the truth?" Sora laughed, thought it was a tasteless joke, threw the letter in the trash, and left the house in the same high heels she used to climb the company stairs on. Happy couple. Days when she visited Minho in public. At the brunch, everything seemed normal. The women smiled, commented on handbags, exchanged recipes they never cooked. Sora did the same. But at a certain moment, one of them, the wife of one of the family's oldest advisors, asked something strange. "Have you ever wondered, what if all this were just a play?" Sora's juice glass stopped in midair. She looked at the woman. And before she could respond, another added, "Some people forget that even in theater, There's always someone behind the curtain. That wasn't conversation. It was a warning. She returned home with a blank face. But inside, her thoughts were racing. She tried calling Minho, voicemail. She sent a message. Seen, but no reply. Upon entering the mansion, she found the letter she had thrown away. Now on the bed, with the same phrase underlined in red pen. That night, she didn't sleep. She just sat on the closet floor, surrounded by the expensive handbag she had longed for, trying to remember if she had left any loose ends. But the truth was, the years had made her negligent. She was no longer afraid. And those who lose fear, lose caution. Minho, at that hour, was in a dark room at the Zheng Foundation, reviewing dossiers he had ordered over the past 3 years. There were photos, dates, transactions, even an audio of Sora speaking with a man in Bizen 5 years earlier about a marriage that could change both their lives. He had listened to that audio dozens of times, but not with hatred, with calm, because every second of betrayal was another brick in the staircase of justice. The next day, she woke up to an empty house. No staff, no background music, no coffee served, just a folder on the dining table. Inside, a copy of the marriage contract, now with highlighted sections, and a single note at the top of the page. Did you read before signing? Or just pretend to know how to play? Sora panicked. She called the lawyer she knew. The number was disconnected. Called the bank. Her accounts had been frozen. Tried to access the credit card app. Access denied. This wasn't a scare. It was a sentence. Not by late afternoon, he returned. Dressed in black, expressionless, he walked toward her like someone crossing a bridge about to collapse. Sora tried to speak, but he simply raised his hand, signaling for silence. Handed her a second folder. This one contained documents of old. Legal cases involving her real name, the one she changed to erase her past. I warned you, he said quietly. But you thought it was love. Sora fell into a chair. For the first time, speechless. Minho looked into her eyes, not with anger, but with the coldness only someone deeply betrayed can carry. You wanted my name. Now you'll learn the weight it carries. She cried, begged, said she had truly fallen in love, that the plan was old, but the feelings had changed. He didn't react, because at that point, words were devalued currency. And he had heard too many. The next morning, Sora received a judicial notification. She was being sued for identity fraud and misappropriation of marital assets. But the most painful blow came in another letter, signed by him and left on her pillow. You will be treated with the same dignity you offered. The mansion was no longer hers, neither was the name. And the friends vanished as quickly as they appeared. They found out she wasn't exactly the woman she claimed to be. And the wealthy do not like being deceived, especially by those who come from below. The newspapers didn't mention her name, but stories circulated about a missing wife, a silent heir, and a lightning-fast divorce. Nothing confirmed. Nothing denied. And that was exactly how Minho had planned it. To destroy without noise. Sora moved into a small apartment in Incheon, unfurnished, unsupported, without luxury. The same neighbors she once looked down on were now her reality. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize what she saw, because for the first time, there was no mask. No performance. She tried to start over. Sent out resumes. Called acquaintances, but eyes always said more than words. No one trusted. No one wanted. She had become what she once despised most. Irrelevant. Meanwhile, Minho rose, not in business, but in conscience. He discovered that justice, when carried out without haste, can heal even the deepest humiliation. But he also understood that revenge never fills the space where love once lived, and that is why, even having won, he still looked out the window at night, in silence, not out of regret, but because he remembered that some battles cost more than they appear, and sometimes winning means losing something you didn't even know you had. Time does not forgive those who fall, but it is especially cruel to those who fall from heights they never deserved. Sora now walked through streets she had once looked down upon. The high heels that once echoed across the marble floors of the Zheng mansion now stumbled on the cracked sidewalks of a neighborhood where dreams were smaller, but truths sharper. No one recognized her. No one smiled at her. And that was the worst part, realizing that her identity, without the symbols of wealth, was invisible. The life she had lived as Minho's wife felt like a poorly told dream. The closet once overflowing with luxury brands became an unspeakable past. She sold what she could. The handbags, the shoes, even the perfumes. But the money vanished quickly, because she hadn't been raised to survive. She had been trained to seduce. And seduction doesn't fill the fridge. She learned that when she had to negotiate the rent with the owner of the small studio she now lived in, and the woman told her bluntly, "Looks don't pay the bills here, dear." Meanwhile, Minho no longer appeared on magazine covers or at business award ceremonies. He chose silence, gave up the spotlight, and began walking among social foundations and discreet contracts. It was as if he had decided not to repeat his father's mistakes, who, falling for a pretty face, handed over an empire to the wrong hands. Minho didn't want to start over. He wanted to repair. But repairing comes at a cost. And the emotional debt he carried was greater than any fortune. Sora tried to find work. Faked resumes softened her past. But her name, or rather, the name she tried to erase, now circulated quietly through HR networks. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. She wasn't just the ex-wife of the heir. She was the mistake that stained the reputation of a traditional family. And in the corporate world, mistakes don't get second chances. Only silence. One night, desperate, she tried calling an old colleague. The woman answered with a guarded tone, like someone picking up a wrong number. Sora asked for help, just needed a bridge, an interview, a recommendation. On the other end of the line, the silence lasted longer than it should have. And then the friend said, "You always knew how to enter, but you never learned how to exit." After that, the number became unreachable. The days grew longer. The cold seemed to creep through the cracks in the thin walls. Sora began frequenting a public library, not to read, but to stay warm. There, she watched students, elderly people, the lonely. For the first time, she felt like part of something small, human, less dangerous. No one there wanted to defeat her, use her, or judge her. They just wanted to pass the time. And that's where she started writing, not to publish, just to remember she still existed. Even so, the weight of shame followed her. Every time she heard someone laugh out loud, she thought it was at her. When someone looked at her for more than 2 seconds, her stomach turned. She felt that everything she wore, said or did screamed fraud. She tried going to church. The pastor spoke of forgiveness. She almost believed it. But upon leaving, she found a flyer posted on the gate with the headline of an old sensational article about her, the woman who deceived the heir. Across town, Minho was facing his own ghosts. Despite winning the legal battle, something still unsettled him. It wasn't regret. It was discomfort. Because in destroying Sora, he had also destroyed the part of himself that still believed in love, no matter how naive that sounded. He visited his mother in the hospital once a week. She no longer spoke, but still held his hand. And once, while watching her sleep, he remembered what she used to say when he was a child. "Never take pride in the pain you cause." He didn't feel pride. But he didn't feel guilt either. It was an emotional minefield. He knew that if he had ignored what he discovered, he would have destroyed his own dignity. But now, seeing Sora erased from the world, he felt that maybe he had gone too far, and that maybe kept him awake at night. Chance, or perhaps the cruel script of life, caused their paths to cross again. In a simple cafe, Sora was serving tables, not as a permanent employee, but as a freelancer. A friend of the owner needed help for a weekend. She accepted. Bills were overdue. And it was during that Saturday shift, with her hands still trembling from the cold, that she saw Minho walk in. He didn't see her immediately. He was with two foreign directors. Speaking fluent, discreet English, she froze. The cup on the tray nearly slipped. But she composed herself, pretended not to see, walked slowly to another table. But it was no use. He saw her. And for the first time, he didn't look away. So Dashra turned, trying to maintain her dignity, but eyes don't lie. Minho noticed. And when the coffee ended, before leaving, he passed by her and simply said, "I think now you know what I knew from the beginning," and walked away, without looking back. But she stood there, frozen, as if slapped in silence. That night, she cried, not because of the encounter, but because she realized that, at some point, she truly believed she could have loved that man, and that maybe, if she hadn't tried to control him, she could have been loved in return. But those reflections always come too late. Like missed trains, like letters never sent. On Monday, the cafe let her go. It was just a favor, they said. She didn't protest. She no longer expected stability. She only hoped to survive. And over time she did. She sold her ring, then her watch, then her pride, started working at a laundry. The blue uniform replaced the silk dresses. And for the first time, no one expected anything from her. Not even herself. Minho found out. One of the company drivers mentioned, unaware of her story, that a well-dressed woman now washes clothes in an old neighborhood. He went there, didn't go in. Stayed in the car, saw her from afar. Her hair tied back, her hands red, her gaze empty. And for a second, he thought about getting out, saying something. But he didn't, because silence, sometimes, protects more than any word. The weeks passed. Life moved on. Minho returned to work, to meetings, to decisions. But there was a new lightness in his posture. As if, upon seeing Sora in that laundry, he had finally closed a cycle, not out of pleasure, but out of justice. And because deep down, he knew time was also judging him. So Dashra, on the other hand, began to change. Small gestures. She began reading at night after work. Stopped lying to people. Started responding with her real name. For the first time, she didn't want to impress anyone. Just wanted to exist without needing to prove anything. And that simplicity, strangely, began to heal her. She never tried to reach out again, not to him, not to the past. And neither did Minho. But in some invisible dimension, they both knew something had been paid, something had been lost, something had been learned, not enough to start over, but enough to move on. Life isn't rebuilt with applause. It's rebuilt in silence. In the mornings when no one asks how you are. In the nights when you learn to be your own shelter. Lee So-ra now woke up to the sound of cheap alarm clocks and neighbors arguing in the hallway. It was a world without filters, without makeup, without an audience. But strangely, more honest than anything she had ever lived. For the first time, she wasn't anyone's character. She was just herself, stripped of artifices, of rings, of appearances. At the laundry, she learned more about the real world than from any book she had pretended to read. She met women who carried the home on their backs, unemployed husbands, sick children. And there, between tubs and soap, she understood that true elegance lies in character. The tired eyes of those women said more than 1,000 speeches. And beside them, Sora stopped feeling ashamed. She began to respect, She began to listen more than speak. She finally began to understand. On a rainy day, an elderly woman offered her warm bread and said, "You have the eyes of someone who has fallen, but can still get up." So-Ri held back her tears, because no one had said something like that to her in a long time, without interest, without judgment, without irony. In that simple gesture, she understood something she had never felt at parties, dinners, or trips, belonging. Meanwhile, Jang Minho continued managing the family business with coldness and precision. But his colleagues noticed subtle changes. He was more patient, more attentive, no longer interrupted so much in meetings. He began to listen even to the least experienced employees. Some said he was in love. Others, that he had gone through a tragedy. No one knew that behind that serene expression was a man who had touched the edge of his own abyss and returned different. He frequented an old bookstore on Friday nights. Read slowly, like someone relearning to see the world with less cynicism. One night, he found a book marked with a forgotten note. "Everything that's forcibly taken from us, ... either kills us or reinvents us." He kept that note. He didn't know who it was from, but it felt like a message for him. To not become the villain of his own story. At one point, his assistant suggested making an anonymous donation to small, struggling businesses. The idea wasn't his, but he approved it, and asked to discreetly include neighborhood laundries among the recipients. No one understood why, but he knew. And he didn't want applause. He just wanted to do something that, somehow, could undo what couldn't be undone. A few weeks later, an envelope was delivered to the laundry where Sora worked. No sender. Inside, a letter with a generic message about community support and an amount large enough to pay the shop's rent for an entire year. Her co-workers were ecstatic, Sora too, but deep down, she was suspicious. And although she didn't tell anyone, she kept the envelope carefully, because from the handwriting, she knew it was from him, but she didn't call, didn't seek him out, didn't send a note. Because now, more than anything, she wanted to prove to herself that she could live without hanging her value on a man's approval, even if that man was the one she had hurt the most. The city moved on. The seasons changed. The streets shifted in color, and one Sunday, she returned to the library, sat on the same bench where she used to warm herself, and began writing again. But this time, she didn't write about revenge, luxury, or ambition. She wrote about dignity, about the lightness that comes when we stop performing and simply exist. That same weekend, Minho wandered through an outdoor book fair. At one of the stalls, a young woman sold handmade notebooks. One of them had a cover embroidered with the phrase, "Truth doesn't set you free. It teaches you how to breathe through pain." He bought it, not because he needed it, but because he understood. And for the first time, he felt that his pain and Sora's had turned into something that no longer needed to bleed. Weeks later, the laundry gained attention through a small article in a local blog. The article spoke of women who restarted without shortcuts. One of the photos showed Sora smiling, her hair tied back, her hands covered in soap. The image reached Minho by accident. An intern mentioned it. He saw it and stayed quiet for long minutes. He stored the photo in a drawer, and that night, he visited his father's grave. Alone, brought simple flowers. And there, before the cold tombstone, whispered, "I didn't repeat the mistake, but I didn't become better than anyone." The confession echoed inside him. For the first time, he spoke out loud what he had never admitted, even to himself. That part of the anger he held toward So-Ri ... was the same he always had toward his own story. At that point, their stories were no longer running parallel. They intertwined in the shadows, each growing in silence, each learning to breathe with the scars they left on one another. And even though their paths seemed opposite, There was an inevitable intersection about to occur. On the anniversary of the Gen Foundation, So-Ra received an unexpected invitation. Not sent directly by Minho, but by one of the directors of the women's division, someone she had briefly met in the past. The letter read, "We know you have stories to tell. And the best stories are the ones that survive their own mistakes." She hesitated, but went. She dressed in what she had. No brands, no heels, just what was comfortable and honest. Upon arriving at the event, she felt the stares. Some ignored her. Others silently analyzed, but there was a different air. As if her fall was now old news. As if now only what she had become remained. And there, before people who once humiliated her in silence, she raised her head without needing to prove anything. Min-Ho saw her from afar. He didn't approach, but he watched. And for the first time, he felt proud, not of who she once was, but of what she endured, of what she rebuilt, and also of what he chose not to destroy by not carrying his revenge to the end. That night, they exchanged no words, only glances, but in those glances there was everything. The apologies never spoken, the wounds that still existed, and the respect that, despite everything, was born from the ruins of the past. On the way home, So-Ra looked out the bus window, saw the same buildings, the same lights, but something had changed. She was no longer the woman who entered that mansion with cold eyes and an empty soul. Now she was a woman who knew the price of her own lies. And more than that, who had learned the value of silent truth. Minho didn't speak to So-Ra again. Even after the encounter at the Foundation's event, he chose to keep his distance. Not out of pride, but because he had learned to respect the limits of another's silence. Some scars, when reopened, don't heal, they infect. And he didn't want to stir up anything else. He had already caused enough. His life now consisted of simple routines, work, books, discreet visits to his mother, and lonely nights in an apartment far too big for one man. But So-Ra's face would return at unpredictable moments. When a woman crossed the street carrying heavy bags, when the phone rang and no one answered, or when the scent of laundry detergent drifted from some open window. He no longer felt anger, nor longing. What remained was something deeper, the awareness that her face carried part of his story, even if they were now living in different chapters. So-Ra, on the other hand, had no idea how often she still occupied his thoughts. She was too busy trying to rebuild her own name. She didn't want fame, she only wanted dignity. She began studying basic accounting at night, considered opening a small laundry business with 2 co-workers. She was afraid. But for the first time, she didn't pretend to be brave. She simply did what she could with what she had. The conversations with her co-workers turned into confessions. She shared fragments of what she had lived, not as drama, but as lessons. One day she said, "I became everything I despise today. And maybe that was necessary for me to understand who I no longer want to be." The others listened in silence. They didn't judge, they simply held her hand. It was the first time she cried without shame. Across the city, Minho's mother passed away, peacefully, without pain, without alarms. Minho was by her side. He held her hand until her final breath. At the funeral, few people came. Few words were spoken, but the air was heavy. That woman had been a symbol of dignity for many, even in her silent suffering. And for Minho, she was the only remaining link to everything that still made sense. After the funeral, Minho didn't return to work immediately. He took a week. Stayed home organizing his mother's diaries, old photo albums, the letters she never had the courage to send. In one of them, he found something that stunned him. A note dated the previous year, written by her, saying, "When we forgive, we free ourselves. But sometimes, we can only forgive when we see that the other has already punished themselves." He understood immediately. She was talking about Sora, and maybe she was right. Days later, while aimlessly walking through a park, Minho came upon a small community fair. Various booths, soft music, children running, and among them, a modest stand with 3 women selling homemade cleaning products. Among them, Sora. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. She was the first to smile. Not a wide smile, just a small signal of peace. He approached slowly, picked up a scented soap, asked the price. She replied naturally, and for a moment, they seemed like strangers. But deep down, they knew that no one else in the world knew each other's cracks so well. "It's different," he said, pointing to the soap. "So am I," she replied. He paid, said nothing more. But as he left, he placed a card on the table. On it, only a number. And the phrase, "if you ever want to talk for real." Sora didn't answer right away. It took days, she thought. She hesitated. She feared. But one day, she called, and they arranged a coffee. Not in a fancy place, on a park bench. They brought coffee in thermal cups, sat down, and started from zero. There were no apologies. No accusations, only truths. Minho told her how he knew everything. How he decided to let her in to see how far she'd go. How he waited, how he hesitated, how he suffered. Sora listened without interruption. Then she told her side. How it began, how she was influenced, how she was afraid to stop, how she tried to love, but got lost in the lie. They talked for hours, no tears, no rage. Just words that had never been said. In the end, they stood up. Minho extended his hand. She shook it. And before turning away, he said, "I don't hate you, and I think you've learned." "I have too," she nodded, but said nothing. In the following months, they didn't see each other again. Each followed their own path, but something had changed. Sora succeeded in opening a small laundry with her 2 co-workers. Minho began discreetly investing in small businesses led by women. Neither of them used the past as currency. Neither tried to rewrite what had been. But both knew what they had lived wasn't in vain. One day, during an interview for a magazine about social entrepreneurship, Minho was asked about his greatest lesson. He answered, "There is no justice without listening. And the greatest revenge is being able to live without wishing for anyone's downfall." In another neighborhood, Sora was writing a short piece for a community blog about new beginnings. At the end of the article, she wrote, "Not every mistake defines us, but every mistake reveals us, and what we do afterward is what builds." U.S. They didn't become a couple again. There was no longer room for that. But on a deeper level, they were more important to each other than any love story could have been. Because they taught each other, through pain, what no one ever taught them with kindness. The last winter arrived as always, gray, damp, and filled with silence. But this time, the cold nitrogen monoxide longer felt like punishment. For Sora, IT was simply part of a season like any other. The window at the laundromat fogged up with every breath. And she didn't even bother to wipe IT anymore. She knew that outside, the world went on as Ida should. And that inside, for the first time, her life did too. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And that was enough. Min-Ho that same morning was flipping through an old family album. The photos had worn edges and the faces had faded a bit, but there was one that always drew his attention. It was the only one in which his mother smiled sincerely, and he was beside her, still a boy, holding a paper toy. That image, more than all the business achievements, reminded him of who he still wanted to be. Someone capable of preserving what is simple. They hadn't seen each other since that last conversation in the park. But there was peace in that. As if they had made an invisible pact, to live their lives with dignity, even if they never crossed paths again. And honoring that pact required strength, much more than trying to rescue what had been broken. Because some stories, no matter how important, need to end so others can begin. At the end of that month, Sora participated in a lecture about the social rehabilitation of women in vulnerable situations. She wasn't in the audience, she was on stage, telling her story without embellishment, without lies, without trying to sound better than she was. She said, in front of everyone, "What destroyed me was the rush to win. What saved me was the humility to start over." The audience went silent. Some applauded softly. Others cried. But what truly marked that night was the fact that Sora, when she stepped down from the stage, didn't feel small. For the first time, she felt that her story could become a foundation for others to walk on. And that gave her a kind of strength that not even all the money she once had could ever offer. Minho read about the lecture days later, in a newspaper clipping left on his desk by his secretary. He didn't say anything, but he placed the paper in the drawer where he kept the memories that truly mattered. And looking out the office window, he thought that perhaps the greatest form of love is wishing someone well without needing to. Be close. The following spring, Sora's laundromat expanded. A new location opened in a neighboring neighborhood. 3 more employees were hired. One was a former inmate. Another, a single mother with no formal education. The third, an elderly woman rejected by her family. Sora chose each one personally. Not because they were competent, but because they knew exactly what it was to fight not to disappear. The name of the laundromat was simple: New Start. No elaborate logo, no marketing strategy. Just a white sign with blue letters. But it was enough. The community recognized the place as more than just a business. It was a symbol of dignity rebuilt. And that was all it needed to keep quietly thriving. Minho continued his business life. But now he divided his time with social projects. He created a credit line for anonymous female entrepreneurs, with symbolic interest rates and free mentoring. He never put his face in the campaigns, nor his name. What mattered wasn't being seen. It was seeing others get the chance that Sora once wasted and later reclaimed with her own hands. On a sunny Sunday, they crossed paths again. By chance, at a cafe, both alone, she was reading. He was waiting for a takeout order. Their eyes met. There was no surprise. Just a faint smile on both sides. He nodded. She nodded back. Neither of them stood up. Neither spoke. And yet, the exchange was complete. A silent recognition of what they had lived and who they had become. That afternoon, So wrote in her journal, "Some encounters aren't meant to last, they're meant to teach." And she closed the notebook with gratitude. She no longer needed to prove anything, nor defend herself, nor be forgiven. She had already forgiven herself. And that, now, was enough to keep moving forward without fear. Minho, that same night, had dinner alone at home. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't reply to messages, just stared out the window at the city. He thought about what could have been, but also about what was. And for the first time, he didn't feel regret, he felt peace. Because he realized that the revenge he once planned so carefully had turned into compassion without him even noticing. The story between them never became a movie, nor made the news. But somewhere in the collective memory of those who knew them, remained the memory of an unlikely couple who lived through love, deception, downfall, and rebuilding, each in their own way. And despite everything, they survived themselves. Today, when Sora closes the laundromat at the end of the day, she looks at the sky and smiles to herself, not out of nostalgia, but because she recognizes the woman she's become. And because she knows that even after all the mud, it's still possible to bloom. Minho still occasionally visits the old family foundation. He talks to young people, listens to their stories, funds projects. And when someone asks why he cares so much, He simply replies, "Because I learned that some mistakes aren't meant to be avoided, they're meant to be redeemed." Both go on with their lives, without promises, without a soap opera happy ending, but with something much rarer, integrity earned through effort. A kind of ending that doramas rarely show, but that life, in its brutal honesty, offers to those who endure pain with truth. And now, the story ends not with a reunion, but with a mutual respect that survived collapse. A kind of love that needs no presents, only recognition, and perhaps that's the noblest kind of all. Because in the end, she married for interest. But he, even wounded, chose to wait, not to destroy, but to teach, and to be free. Now I ask you, who stayed with us until this moment, if you were in Minho's place, would you have forgiven? And if you were so raw, could you start over without looking back? Leave your answer in the comments. This is your free dorama channel here on YouTube.